Let's talk Rambam. On the theology of Rambam, which has caused a lot of controversy in Jewish circles and scholarly circles, because Rambam spoke a different vocabulary from the other sages and commentaries when he spoke about theology. Of course, in his halachic writings, it's all pretty much the same language. But when it came to theology, he had a different language from that which was the traditional spoken vocabulary in Jewish thinking. And that caused a lot of people, and some people with great authority, to question his loyalty to Jewish thinking. He was a philosopher, he was quoting Aristotle, the man's off, he's off base, God forbid. But with time, people figured out the vocabulary and realized that he was saying exactly the same things, and maybe even more profoundly, even though he was using a new vocabulary, or a contemporary vocabulary. So, for example, Rambam writes in the Guide to the Perplexed, and also in the Code, that God has no emotions, that we cannot attribute emotions to God. And his argument is very simple, philosophical. God is unchanging by definition. God is not subject to change. He is therefore not subject to growth and decline. He is eternal. He is not subject to change of mind because he knows everything. So what is he going to find out that's going to change his mind that he doesn't already know? Oh, well, in that case. So God is not subject to anger and to regret, to sadness or to joy, because all these constitute changes in God, and God is not subject to change. Kind of makes sense. It was also consistent with the thinking, the philosophical thinking of the time, of the day, that God is immutable. But that, of course, flies in the face of every page of Torah. Right in the beginning of the Torah, it says that God regretted making man. He regretted. What does it mean that God says, let me go down to Sodom and see, are they really as bad as it sounds? Go down to see, to find out, what is that? And then, of course, God doesn't get angry. In the Torah, God says, if you don't obey my commandments, I will be angered. And if you still don't obey my commandments, I will get grimly angry. And if that doesn't help, boy, I'll get really angry. Now you're really getting me angry. So there are degrees of anger described in Torah, attributed to God. So what does it mean? God is not subject to anger? Now, granted that that presents a problem. How is God subject to anger if he is God, all-knowing, all-powerful, and so on and so forth? But then again, to turn around and say he doesn't have any of these emotions, well, then what are you doing to the Torah? Then you get into the prophets. And God is having all sorts of emotions. How come you abandoned me? He's jealous. Why is it I talk to you and you don't listen? Even donkeys know their master. You get into the Song of Songs, which is a metaphor for the relationship between God and the Jewish people. Well, God is passionate, God is lonely. I mean, come on, what is this? Now, obviously, when the Rambam says that God is not subject to all of these emotions, he also mentions speech. That God doesn't speak in the literal sense of the word. Every page of Torah is God speaking. And God said, and God spoke, and God told, and God... So obviously, everybody will agree with Rambam that God's speech is not the same as our speech. I mean, that goes without saying. Does that mean, as some commentaries suggest, that God's speech is not heard by the ear? physically, that it's some kind of a mental telepathy communication, and we call it speech because we don't have a word for telepathy in Hebrew? Is that why? Or is God's speech exactly the same as ours in terms of how it's heard, and the difference between his speech and ours is that his speech is more effective? God said, and there was. I say, and there's not. There's nothing. What exactly is the difference between our speech and God's speech? The essential difference, which brings about secondary differences, the essential difference is that God's speech is his own. Our speech is not. So essentially we have to begin with one basic principle. God is not a creation. He is the creator. What that means is that when we look at our speech, at our experiences, at our faculties, we are looking at something we did not create. We are looking at something that was done to us without consulting us. We were not asked, what kind of speech would you like to be capable of? Or would you like to speak at all? There are creations in this world that don't speak. So why do we have speech? I have no idea. God decided that he wants us to have that faculty. God also decided what that faculty would consist of. Words composed of letters, sentences composed of words, paragraphs composed of sentences, and basically to no avail. That's human speech. We talk and talk and talk and talk, and not only don't we effectively communicate, we miscommunicate and cause all sorts of trouble by talking too much and by saying the wrong things at the wrong time to the wrong people. So, is this our invention? Is speech our ability, or an ability, a faculty, imposed on us without our consent or without our opinion? That's why it's not really correct to say that we have speech. We're talking about whether God has speech. Do we really have speech? The fact is that we do speak, but is it ours? Are we possessed of speech? As a gift, yeah. As an imposition, yes. God inflicted it on us by creating us with the ability to speak. There's that famous joke about how you can't wait to teach your child the first words and to have him complete a sentence, and then he learns how to speak, and all you do is tell him to be quiet. So is speech a blessing? What is it? I guess it's a blessing. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. We wouldn't be able to discuss whether speech is a good thing or not if we didn't have speech. But is it ours? Is it literally correct to say human beings have the faculty of speaking, communication? On the other hand, if God speaks, what kind of speech, what kind of talk would that be? Not something given to him by a creator, not something imposed on him by a creator, not something dictated to him without his will, but rather a faculty by choice, voluntary. His speech can therefore be whatever he makes it to be, whatever he chooses it to be. In that sense, God's speech is not similar to ours. If we go on to emotions, does God get angry or do we get angry? Rambam says God is not angry. God does not experience anger. Torah says God does get angry. And that's a very important part of our orientation to God, our relationship with God, is based on the fact that we don't want to make him angry. The emotions, such as anger, sadness, happiness, in the human being those emotions are, to some degree, to a great degree, involuntary. Of course, we have some control. You can be happy if you decide to be. That's what we're told. You cannot be sad if you don't want to be, even when something saddening happens. That's what we're told. You cannot get angry even though, so we're told. And of course, to some degree, that is true. We don't get angry every time we're provoked. We don't get sad over every sad event. And we're not happy every time we're supposed to be happy. So there is a certain degree of flexibility. But at the heart of it, human sadness is a reflex, not a choice. Anger is a reflex, not a choice. It's a reflex that we should learn to master. But by nature, a child gets angry, not by choice, by reflex. So again, when we say God doesn't have anger, human beings have anger, is the second part of that sentence correct? Human beings have anger? Or does anger have human beings? Do we possess it, or does it possess us? It's probably correct to say that when a person gets really angry, he is possessed by anger. It's demonic possession. Because anger is a demon, a bad angel. So when a person is really angry, is that him? Or has he lost the him? He's been taken over by the anger. And the same with sadness and joy. So unless it's a purposeful joy, a premeditated joy, unless it's a purposeful discontent or unhappiness, the ordinary joy and happiness are reflexes, not choices. They control us more than we control it. In fact, by nature, there are certain people who are born with a predisposition to joy. And you kind of wish they would slow down or calm down or stop smiling all the time. And then there are people who are by nature disposed towards sadness for no reason at all. They're just melancholic. They carry the weight of the world on their shoulders for some reason. So that certainly is not voluntary. So what Rambam is saying about God's mood is that God doesn't have these moods. Meaning to say, God is not controlled or identified with those moods. Whereas a human being can be identified as a happy person, a sad person, or an angry person. Why do we say, oh, that guy, he's an angry type. He's the melancholic type. Because it controls him. It decides who he is. It makes him what he is. And so it's correct to say that's what he is. He is an anger walking around. He is a sadness walking around. That is not correct if we're talking about God. We can't say God is an angry God. We can't say God is a sad God or a happy God. God will be happy when he thoughtfully or purposefully chooses to be happy. And he will be saddened by things that he chooses to be saddened by. But it is not a reflex, and it is not something that controls him. He controls it. Let's put it another way. There are many things that we cannot attribute to God in the positive sense. On the other hand, there is nothing we can deny God as being incapable or beyond his reach. So, is God angry? It is perfectly correct to say, of course not. Of course not. He's God. Then again, is God angry? Well, sure. He's everything. So is he or is he not angry? So here's how a philosopher would put it which would be correct but a little confusing. Is God angry? Well, he's not angry. In other words, you cannot say that he can't be angry. So is he? Well, since he can't be denied, it can't be excluded from his range, therefore it's there. But is that him? No, of course not. So again, here is the difference between a divine being and a created being. A human being gets angry not because he is all capable and therefore anger must be included in his repertoire. On the contrary, he has a very limited repertoire, and that repertoire is forced on him, imposed on him by a creator. So anything that a human being can do, he is stuck with. He can do it because that's part of his makeup, not part of his freedom of choice. So a human being can get angry, can get sad, and can get happy. Why those three? Well, because that's all he's got. So he has a fixed set of faculties. So what does it mean that a human being is angry? A human being is made up of these ingredients, and one of the ingredients is anger. On the divine level, it's the opposite. God is not made up of any ingredients. He is not composed of parts or of faculties. He is a pure being, without definition, without limitation, without restriction. How unrestricted is he? Well, he's so unrestricted, he can be angry too. He can be sad. He can be happy. Not that he is any of those things, but none of those things are excluded from his repertoire. The resulting difference is this. When a human being is angry, it's not really him. And this gives us a certain kind of wisdom and a certain kind of tolerance or flexibility. When someone is angry in your life, and it's annoying and it's upsetting, reflecting for a moment on the fact that anger is an unavoidable ingredient in human conditions makes the anger a little less personal. And in most cases, at least a certain part of the anger is not personal. So it's not like, why are you angry at me? Why? It's the human condition. It's not personal. And when we see someone lose their temper, one of the ways of reacting or responding to it is to think to yourself, this anger thing is such a curse to the human race. It's not, wow, look at that, a person being angry. Every person is angry. Every person is unnecessarily angry. So when you see somebody being angry, instead of identifying that person with the anger, you're identifying the human race. So when you see when someone in your life is angry, you expand, you broaden the picture to include the entire human species. Human beings have anger. It's sad, but it's true. And that's what you're seeing. The same with sadness and joy. A person is sad, a person is upset. It's not something to worry about necessarily because human beings are that way. It's a human frailty. This is how those who are very wise live their lives. They look at the human condition, not at the individual expressing it. Fools, on the other hand, suffer because every time they see anger or sadness or jealousy or whatever it is, they think that this individual expressing these emotions invented it, as if no one else does this. And therefore they can't understand. What is wrong with you? How could you? Why do you? Why must you? Why can't you be different? Of course, that question can apply to any human being. So that kind of narrow vision is a lack of wisdom. The wise human being understands the limitations of the human condition. On the other hand, when God gets angry, When God is sad, when God is happy. What does that mean? It is not the divine condition. So when people say, oh, God is an angry God, or Christians say, oh, the God of the Old Testament is an angry God. You're talking about God? He's not angry. He is capable of anger. Why is he capable of anger? Isn't he infinite? Isn't he perfect? Yes, precisely. He is so infinite and so perfect that anger is part of his repertoire. But then what isn't? What is he not? What can't he experience? He's God. So when Rambam says, if you want to understand God, you have to know some basics. God is not subject to change. He is not subject, therefore, to these moods or to these emotions because they would constitute a change. In the human being, it would constitute a change. When God is angry, it is not a change. When God is sad, it is not a change. I'll explain it this way. If a human being is capable of throwing a baseball 98 miles an hour, and he does so every day from the pitcher's mound towards home plate, you now know that he is capable of throwing a baseball 98 miles an hour from the rubber to the plate, to the home plate. One day he turns around and he throws the baseball 98 miles an hour from the mound to second base. You say, whoa, when did he learn to do that? He just acquired another talent. He has changed. He's growing. No, he's not. It's the same faculty, it's the same ability, it's the same arm. Does it make any difference whether he throws it to the west or he throws it to the east? And if he can throw it in both directions, is he multi-talented? Of course not. How is it that God knows what we are going to choose? Before we make that choice, he obviously can't know what we're going to choose because there was no choice. When we make the choice, he now knows in advance what we're going to choose. So before we made the choice, he didn't know or couldn't know. Once we make the choice, now he knows. Has he gotten smarter with time? Has he acquired more knowledge? Again, the answer is no. When you have the ability, and the ability can be expressed in different ways, you're not acquiring new talents when you express it in any direction or in any way, even though you hadn't done it before, or it's the first time. So when God got jealous the first time, was that like a new experience for him? When you're truly infinite and all things are included in that infinity, then nothing that happens or nothing that you do and nothing that you express is a change because it's all there. Let me make this a little more precise. When we say that God is all-powerful, we have to be careful with what we mean by that. God is all-powerful. God can do anything. What does that mean? If you think of it in human terms, a human being can speak, a human being can walk, a human being can see, a human being can hear, etc., etc., etc. Imagine if a human being were infinitely talented and therefore could not only do the above-mentioned things, but he can do anything, everything. That would simply mean that you've increased his functions. Some human beings are capable of 10 things. More capable human beings are capable of 20 things. If you get to be really talented, you're capable of 30 things. Well, theoretically, a person can go on growing like that until he is capable of anything. But then it would mean that he is simply a more complex being composed of more parts. So he now has this faculty, the other faculty, and that's what makes him. Those are his marbles. He's got many marbles. More than the average bear. But when we say God is all capable, we don't mean because he is made up of all the marbles in the world. It means that he is made up of no marbles and therefore capable of everything. There's a huge difference there. A young man came to the Rebbe's secretary and he said that he would like to go on a shlichus, he'd like to go out and work for the Rebbe in a community, but he has no talents. He's not good at anything. So the Rebbe's secretary said to him, well, that's perfect. If you're not good at any one thing, then you can do anything. But if you come and tell me, I'm good at this, where should I go? You're good at this, then we can't use you. Because when you go on a shlichus into a community, you never know what you're going to need to do. So there is no job description. So if you come knowing that you have no particular talents, well then fine, then you'll do whatever the situation calls for, and that makes you infinitely capable. Not because you have a large selection of talents, but because you have none. And therefore are not governed by talent. That is the infinity of God. It's not that God is so big that he encompasses all the pieces. No, God has no pieces at all. How then is he all capable? By process of elimination. Because nothing is excluded. Not because he's composed of all those parts. Now, on the one hand, you might say, well, in that case, God's anger is not real anger. It's not the real thing. God is only angry by choice. That's not really angry. Real anger is when you lose it. That's real anger. But God doesn't lose it. He's angry by choice. He's thoughtfully angry, intentionally angry. Well, that's not real anger. God is happy when you do a mitzvah. Well, he's not really happy. He chooses to be happy, so it's not the real thing. So we really get angry. We really have happiness and sadness, but he does it, but it's not the real thing. The opposite is true. The opposite is true. God's anger is the real thing. God's sadness is the real thing. And God's joy is the real thing. Ours is just a reflex. On rare occasion do we experience true anger, true joy, and true sadness. And for that you have to work hard. Because by nature, our impulses and our moods are not the real thing. One more thought. It's easy to say God doesn't get angry. It's easy to say God doesn't get into a bad mood. Sure. Why? Because he's not capable of change, he's not subject to change, and therefore he doesn't have a change of mood or a change of attitude. But what do we do with a statement, and what would Rambam do with a statement like God says, Ohafti eschem, Amar Hashem. God says, I love you. Not really love? God doesn't really love? God doesn't really have the emotion? He's just schmoozing us up? What is he doing when he says, I love you? We're not so eager, we're certainly not so willing to accept Rambam's statement that God is not subject to emotion. Here we wish he was. Sure, when he gets angry, we say, nah. Can't really be angry. But love, oh yeah, that really. No, we can't do that. So either it's real or it's not real. We can't go both ways. What is the difference in the human being between the emotion of love and, let's say, anger or sadness? Are they the same? Do they happen the same way, in the same place? Kabbalah makes a great distinction between God said, let there be light, and God thought to create the world. Said is an external thing. Thought is an internal thing. They're not the same. So when God said, "Let there be," it was a very different state of affairs than when God thought to create the world. When Torah tells us God said, "Let there be," Torah is telling us God's greatness, that He can say, "and there was." The Torah is also telling us about the insignificance of creation. All God did was say. How significant can that be? Because speech, saying, speaking, has these two connotations. To say means, like people, "I was just talking. I was just talking. Yes, I said it, but so what? I didn't mean it." So speech suggests an external, an impersonal, a secondary function. I spoke, but it's not me. I didn't mean it. That's not what I was thinking. Or, yes, I said that, but I wasn't thinking. So disregard it. Doesn't mean anything. On the other hand, when a person says, "I've been thinking," now you want to know. Like, oh, that's what you were thinking? And a person can say, "Well, yeah, I was just thinking." Oh, no. Thinking is a little more personal, a little more internal than speaking. And that's why even if you say nice things, but I find out that you've been thinking nasty thoughts. You said good morning, but you meant get lost. This is serious. God as a creator uses external faculties. And God saw all that He had made. How do you make something? Not with your emotions, not with your brain, with your hands. Action is an external function. So God saw all that He had made, and it was good. So now the verse is telling us two things. God created a world with His hands, so to speak, but it really appealed to Him. It was good. So now we're told that although the creation is an external function, like a carpenter putting together a building, this was not an impersonal construction. God saw that what He had made and He liked it. It was good. When Rambam says God does not speak the way we speak, it should not lead us to the conclusion that God doesn't love. Those are two different things. And the reason for it is this. The difference between action and love is that action is something a person takes on that was not there before. Before I built the house, I was not a builder. You build the house, that's a whole new activity. External means something that isn't already there waiting to happen. It's something you have to exit your own state of peaceful comfort and push yourself into some other activity other than yourself. And that's why it is not really correct to say that God is a creator. He's not a creator. That's not what He does. He is the creator because He did create this world. But He's a creator? No, He's not. It's like somebody once asked the Rebbe, should I become a typist? This was back in the days when they used typewriters. Anybody remember? There used to be this machine called a typewriter, and secretaries used to use it to type letters. And this woman wrote to the Rebbe, should she become a typist? So the Rebbe said, learn to type, don't become a typist. You want to build a house? Build the house, but don't be a builder. Be a human being. Now, so historians, they say, human beings are hunters-gatherers. No, they're not. They're human beings. When they need to hunt, they'll hunt. When they need to gather, they'll gather. Human beings are not gatherers. There are certain animals that are gatherers. That's all they ever do, and that's all they can do. They were created to gather, not human beings. So to say human beings are gatherers is like saying human beings are naked apes. We are not another kind of animal. So when a person acts or says, it's an external function and therefore not to be identified with the person. So the person said, good morning. Oh, so he's a good morning sayer. No, he's not. He can also say good night. Oh, multi-talented. No. He is not a speaker, even though he did speak, and he does speak. But he's not a speaker, he's a human being. When you say, oh, he's a good talker, is that a compliment? Usually not. Because that doesn't describe a human being. So when you say he's a good talker, you basically mean to say he's not a mensch. And that's not a compliment. On the other hand, when a person experiences an emotion like love, is he loving or is that him? You know, people say we do lunch. You want to do lunch? Nobody says you want to do love. You can't do love because love is an emotion, a genuine emotion. What does emotion mean? Even in the human being. An emotion is not an external function because it's really not a function at all. It's like saying he threw the ball to the east instead of to the west. That's not a new function. It's not another function. It's simply the same thing repeated. An emotion is not a function. An emotion is basically the mold of the heart, so to speak. So if you have a lump of clay and you make it round, and then you decide, no, I'll make it square. What has changed in the clay? Nothing at all. So to say that the clay is now different because it's in a square shape, and before it was in a round shape, that's silly. Nothing has changed in the clay. It's not more clay, it's not less clay. Same thing. Clay can be molded. So molded any way you want, it's the same thing. Nothing new has happened to the clay. An emotion, a genuine emotion, means the shape of the heart, and the heart is malleable. So one of the shapes of the heart is love. Another shape of the heart is fear. Another shape of the heart is compassion. Another shape is hate. So when a person was not compassionate, and then suddenly he is compassionate, what happened? Nothing happened. Nothing was added. Nothing changed. The same heart, unchanged, has taken on this shape. When a teacher says to the student, pay attention, what is he asking the student to do? Imagine a teacher says to the student, yeah, pay attention. And the kid says, I can't. You can't? That's very serious. You need immediate attention. What do you mean you can't pay attention? Another teacher would say, you're obviously not interested in what I'm saying. What are you thinking? The kid can't say nothing. Nothing. I can't think. What do you mean you can't? You are thinking. So when the teacher says pay attention, the kid is paying attention, just not to the teacher. Because you can't not pay attention. You have to be conscious of something. So the teacher is really not asking the student to do anything additional or anything different. He's simply saying, will you stop pitching that way and pitch towards me? It's the same talent. You don't have to acquire anything new. You don't have to go out of yourself, beyond yourself. You're doing it, just do it this way. So what does it mean? Love your fellow Jew. Well, maybe I can't. No, you can't. You have a heart. Use it this way. So if you give a kid a lump of clay and you say, make a circle, he says, I can't. What do you mean you can't? It's clay. It can. See, but I don't know how to get it to do that. You don't have to get it to do that. It's there. It's just a matter of revealing, not creating or producing. So when we say God loves, we don't have the same problem as when we say God spoke. Because when you say God spoke, you say, wait, you mean before he didn't, then he did? Oh, that's a change. Because speaking is an activity that doesn't exist until you do it. So it's not like God had this whole speech prepared all along and he's just delivering it now. He doesn't run around with a script. There's no script. There are no words until you say them. There are no activities until you do them. But that's not the same with love. Love is the shape of our heart, and we already have a heart, and the heart already has that shape. So it's just a matter of pay attention this way instead of that way. Love this way, not that way. So a person has a heart, so the person has love. He's busy loving himself. Torah comes along and says, excuse me, but can you turn it this way? Love your fellow Jew. Oh, you can't? Oh, you love yourself. You see the new meaning in that sentence? Love your fellow Jew as you love yourself. As yourself. That's like saying, love your fellow Jew, and don't tell me you can't. You obviously love yourself. So it's just a matter of different direction. So we can't say, how could God possibly love us? Isn't that a change in him? Love is not a change. It's not a thing. It's just the shape of the heart. Maybe that's why the Kabbalah says, the Zohar says, that God chose 10 faculties, 10 attributes, and identified with them. God does not identify with his speech or with his actions, but he identifies with his attributes. And so we get this impression, or we have this impression, that love is divine, anger is divine, but building and speaking and doing, no, that's just human activity. At some degree that's true. Because although God invented love, he identifies with it more than he identifies with rocks and stones and trees and birds and so on. Because to identify with a creation is to not be yourself. And God is himself. To identify with an emotion does not violate who you are. Because emotion is not a thing separate from you, it's simply the shape you take on. So God takes on that shape, but personalizes it more than when he takes on the shape of a creator, but doesn't get personal with that. And finally, this explains where in a number of places in Torah, God says, in a moment of pain, God says, look, if you don't want, we'll just undo creation and go back to chaos. We'll go back to tohu vavohu. What that means is, God can't stop loving us. God can't stop being what he identified himself with. But he can easily stop the other stuff. Because the other stuff is not personal. So God never says, look, if you don't want to work with me, if you don't want to cooperate, then fine, so I won't love you. He doesn't say that ever. But he will say, so fine, you don't want to work with me, so I'll destroy you. But I can't stop loving you. I'll just destroy you. In other words, I'll stop being a creator because that's an external function. But I can't stop being who I am. And that's why on other occasions God will say to the angel, What do you want me to do? Destroy them? I love them. Can't destroy them because I can't stop loving them. So, is Rambam really saying that God does not love? God forbid. Is he saying that when God says he's angry, he doesn't really mean it? God forbid. When the Torah says God spoke, he didn't really speak? People thought they heard? Oh, come on. If you had a tape recorder with you at Mount Sinai, would the tape recorder pick up the words of God? The answer is yes. Does that mean God's speech is like ours? No, of course not. Ours, like I said before, ours is a faculty imposed on us with the properties and limitations and restrictions that God chose to put on it. God's speech is voluntary. God's speech is the real thing, and that's why when he says, there is. And we are given a Xerox copy because we are created in his image. And that's why when we speak, we call it speech, but it doesn't work the way his does. So his speech is the real one, and ours is the image. So when we look at it, Rambam is actually saying the same thing that the Zohar says, but the Zohar sounds so much more mystical, and Rambam sounds so much more factual that it gives the impression that they're not agreeing, but they are in full agreement. Make sense? On a practical level, knowing the difference between words, speech, and emotion, does it make any sense to say, I used to love you, but when you said what you said, that's it, I don't love you anymore? Does it make any sense? Can it even be true? Is it possible that somebody will say something to you and the words will make you stop loving them? Will destroy your love for them? It can't be true. Unless the love wasn't real to begin with. And that's probably why you get into a big fight with your parents because they said something and it hurt you for 40 years. And you didn't talk for 40 years. And in the 41st year, you discovered how much you love them. Why are you surprised? Words can't destroy love. If you love somebody and you discover that they don't love you, that can destroy your love. Because now you're dealing in the world of emotion. But you can't compare speech to love, because speech is only a garment, and love is the condition of your heart, not something you do. So the expression, make love, is a sick expression. Love is not something you make. If you're making love, then you're just talking. Talk is something you make. At least according to the movies, the Indians used to say, let's make talk. And they were right, because that's what talk is. It's something you decide to engage in because it's not there until you do it. So you make talk, or make small talk, but you don't make love. You become it. It's the shape of your heart, and therefore, you're it. So even to say, I have love, is incorrect. You don't have it. If you have it, you could give it away. You can't give it away, because you don't have it. You are it. So giving love doesn't mean giving a thing. It means giving yourself. So if a person says, look, I love you a lot, but I don't want to go with you, that's a contradiction in terms. I love you a lot means I give myself to you. So to say, I love you, but I don't want to give myself to you, what are you talking about? That's like saying, I love you, but nothing personal. I really love you, but I don't want to get involved. That make any sense? So what does it mean to love someone from arm's distance? It's an oxymoron. Puts things in perspective. And we have to be careful because you can't imagine how much grief, how much pain, how much disruption was caused in the days of Rambam when people reacted to his words as if he was saying something unkosher. The community was divided with you think this election is dividing the America? That argument as pro-Maimonides and anti-Maimonides, it tore the Jewish community apart. Luckily, it didn't last very long, but it was pretty intense. Pretty intense. There's a commentary, a very respected commentary, whose comments on Rambam are printed in every edition of Rambam. Some of his comments are so, I don't know what to call it even. Yeah, there are always commentaries on commentaries. And they're all usually quite polite and respectful. A very popular expression is begging his forgiveness. I don't understand what he's writing here. This commentary doesn't bother with the niceties. He says, not worth the paper it's written on. A waste of paper. Pretty harsh. Leads us to another thing Rambam says. Medically speaking, health-wise, so a person's mood and a person's frame of mind is the first medical consideration. Because what the person is more crucial than what the person feels. Now, regular doctors say, so what do you feel? Where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? That's the least important question in the world. The most important question is, so how do you feel? How do you feel about the pain? That's more important. Where are you? So good doctors will tell you, your child is having fever or throwing up or got a rash is he smiling? He's smiling? Don't come to the office. And don't give him 2 aspirins. Let it go. He's obviously healthy. He's not smiling. He hasn't smiled in 2 days. Bring him in. But then they wouldn't know what to do for him anyway, so don't even bother bringing him in. So the point of it is this. When a person says, I hate, that's a serious statement. When the person says, my foot hurts, so the foot hurts. It's not crucial. I hate, ooh, that's serious, because that's you. So a person comes to a doctor and says, I'm worried because my foot hurts. Forget the foot. Attend to the worry. That's the serious part. Because it's not like I have a worry. I worry. You're describing the shape of your condition, the shape of you, and it's not a good shape. You're not in good shape. So forget the foot. It's the worry that you should be concerned with. So when God says, I love, that's a serious statement. Because that's the shape he has taken on. That doesn't go away. And that's why even if we sin, he loves us anyway. Because a sin is just an act. And you don't let an act dictate internal conditions. That's why somebody once said to God, Jews are very good. Okay, fine, they sin sometimes, but that doesn't mean anything because when a Jew does a mitzvah, he makes a party. You make a bris, you invite people, you're going to do the bris. Yeah, you invite people, you make a party out of it, you send out invitations to a wedding because you're going to shake the lulav and esrog. Sure, all Jews get together, they do it in public and make a big deal about it. And the Seder, you invite everybody, the family gets together. There are times when Jews sin, but obviously not with the same enthusiasm because they don't invite anybody. And they don't make a party about it. So they don't sin the way they do mitzvahs. When they do a mitzvah, that's them. That's the shape they're taking on. They did a sin, so they did. Don't get bent out of shape over something they did.